The poem Stolen Boat begins with a pictorial description of countryside where a 10-year-old boy finds a little boat near a lake on one summer evening. And the boat is tied to a willow tree. The boy unties it and steps into it and starts rowing the boat along the lake. Now he derives immense pleasure while rowing the boat. At the same time, he gets anxious because he feels that he has done a dishonest deed by stealing a boat. His conscience brings in him guilty feeling. So here the poet has beautifully described the mental state of a small boy. One summer evening, led by her, I found a little boat tied to a willow tree within a rocky cave, its usual home. Straight I unloosed her chain and stepping in, pushed from the shore. It was an act of stealth. On a summer evening, the young poet found a little boat tethered to a willow tree in some rocky cave. So it was tied up, and he stole the boat and took it on a joyride across the lake. Now he was aware of his act of stealth. Okay, he knew that he was stealing. Led by her. So here her denotes nature, and he says that it was an act of stealth. Here, what the poet is trying to say is that stealing the boat gave him immense pleasure. Now, it was a feeling of unrestrained freedom, yet at the same time, he was disturbed by his guilt at having stolen someone else's property. And troubled pleasure, nor without the voice of mountain echoes, did my boat move on, leaving behind her still, on either side, small circles glittering idly in the moon, until they melted all into one track. So, as said in the first paragraph, that it was a sneaky act that gave him a mix of pleasure and worry, nor without the voice of mountain echoes. So here he is telling that the mountain echoes, it's like a voice, accompanied the movement of my boat, of his boat, and my oars left little circular ripples on either side of the boat, which were shining lazily in the moonlight, until they all dissolved in the boat's wake into one long path of shining water. Of sparkling light, but now, like one who rose proud of his skill, to reach a chosen point, with an unswerving line, I fixed my view upon the summit of a craggy ridge, the horizon's utmost boundary, far above. In this paragraph, the writer or the poet is talking. Now I was like someone who is proud of how good he is at rowing. He is praising himself for his skill. In order to row in a straight line for his destination, he locked his gaze or his view on a certain jagged mountain peak, the farthest point on the horizon. Was nothing but the stars and the grey sky. She was an elfin pinnace. Lustily I dipped my oars into the silent lake, and as I rose upon the stroke, my boat went heaving through the water like a swan. Above the peak were only stars and grey sky. So his boat was an elf's boat, and he vigorously lowered his oars into the silent lake, and as he lifted with each rowing motion, his boat would push forward through the water like a swan. Just like how a swan moves front, his boat also was moving in that manner. When from behind that craggy steep, till then, the horizons bound, a huge peak, black and huge, as if with voluntary power instinct, upraised its head I struck and struck again, and growing still in stature, the grim shape towered up between me and the stars, and still, for so it seemed, with purpose of its own and measured motion, like a living thing, strode after me. With trembling oars I turned, and through the silent water stole my way. Then from behind that huge mountain peak, which up until now had been the highest point on the horizon, an even bigger peak, black and giant, appeared. So, as if it were a living, thinking being, his second mountain seemed to lift its head, and he rode towards it. Then the mountain kept getting bigger and bigger. So a scary shape that rose above him and blocked out the stars. Now he was scared. So it still seemed to me that it was alive. He felt it was alive, to have its own motives and the way it was moving, just like a living creature. It seemed to pursue him. It seemed as if it was coming towards him, and he started trembling. And with trembling, with fright, with fear, he started to shake with fear. And then, with his trembling hands, he turned around and rowed back through the noiseless water to the boat's dock, the willow tree. Back to the covert of the willow tree. There in her mooring place I left my bark, and through the meadows homeward went, in grave and serious mood. But after I had seen that spectacle, for many days my brain worked with a dim and undetermined sense of unknown modes of being. Over my thoughts there hung a darkness, call it solitude or blank desertion. No familiar shapes remained, no pleasant images of trees, of sea or sky, no colors of green fields, but huge and mighty forms that do not live like living men, moved slowly through the mind by day and were a trouble to my dreams. He came back and he left the boat docked there and then walked back home through the fields in a sober and serious mood. After this experience, for many days, his thoughts were occupied by a dark, mysterious intuition that they were forms of existence that he knew nothing about. And his thoughts were covered in a kind of darkness. You could call it solitude or empty abandonment. No recognizable shapes reminded him, or he did not remember any of those things that he had seen in that entire journey. No nice images of the trees, sea, or sky. He couldn't picture the greens of the fields. Instead, giant, powerful shapes that were not alive in the same way that people are alive. It moved slowly in mind during the day, and at night, these shapes gave him troubling dreams. He couldn't sleep because of it, and it was haunting him. So Wordsworth addresses the universal ideal of wisdom and spirit. He says that this universal soul is the cause for the eternal motion and force behind all forms and images of this world.